the 220 minus your age thing is not very accurate, and you need to get most of our older clients will get into 160s and 170s with no problem, very comfortably, and be able to do that once or twice a week. And that's going to be, I think that's the kind of stuff that, again, it keeps your heart healthy. It keeps your arteries healthy. There's a lot that's going into the fact, you don't want to jump into that with no prep work, but you do want to try to make that pump work in different ways.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. He is one of the world-leading experts in the fields of strength and conditioning, functional training, and sports performance. His name is Mike Boyle. He's the co-founder of Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, MBSC, and he has trained thousands of athletes from youth to professional, including members of the Boston Red Sox, Boston Bruins, New England Revolution. He's a very sought-after speaker and educator. He's authored numerous books and articles on strength training and athletic development, and he influences coaches and trainers worldwide. He trains many of the top trainers, or has over the years, out there. So real pleasure to have you here, Coach Boyle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I love these conversations, so I'm looking forward to it.
Amazing. Well, yeah, why don't we start with just a little bit of your background story, just to give people a little background.
It's funny. I'm reading the Bezos blueprint right now, and that's one of the things that they talk about with Jeff Bezos is telling stories. And I'm always kind of reluctant to tell my story, and then I realize, okay, I should probably tell my story, because I was basically a bartender until I was 30 years old, because I quit. I got an athletic training job at Boston University in 1982, I think, and realized I didn't like athletic training, realized I wanted to be in strength and conditioning. And so I quit my full-time job, got a bartending job, and volunteered as a strength coach. And then I worked kind of for the different programs, paid me a little bit of money here and there. And I was this guy who was living the dream of being a college strength and conditioning coach, and sort of having this alter ego where I bartended at night and on the weekends. And interestingly enough, I bartended a lot. Most of the time I bartended right across from Fenway Park. So it was very interesting to end up in Fenway Park in the dugout, getting a World Series ring. Wow. Probably about 30 years after the time I left the bar across the street. So, but as you said, I've done a lot of stuff. I was a football strength coach wannabe, which is what everybody was. I'm 66 years old, so it's different. I've been doing this now. I think this is either my 44th or 45th year. I can never really get it straight, but it's been a really long time. At Boston University, I ended up being a hockey strength coach, because at Boston University is sort of Notre Dame or Nebraska in football, Boston University in hockey. Obviously, if you've ever watched the movie Miracle, most of the movie revolves around the 4 BU players that were on that team. I actually have got to work in some capacity with 3 of the 4, which was pretty cool during my time there at the university, because I was just there right at the right time. And 2 of them, Mike Ruzioni and Dave Silk, actually were assistant coaches for us on the hockey team at some point during the time that I was there. And Jack O'Callahan was around a lot. And so I got to be around those guys. So I've gotten to do a lot of interesting things. As I said, I got to spend 2 years with the Red Sox, get a World Series ring. I've got a couple national championship rings for ice hockey. And some people say I invented training for the NFL Combine, which I may have done. I'm the first person I know who did it. I did it in the 80s at some point, and did a bunch of that through the 80s and 90s, had a bunch of first-round draft picks. So I've had a pretty broad spectrum of stuff.
Incredible. Yeah, and I know you've also helped you've kind of helped shape the way people train these days, and that's something I definitely want to get into. We have a lot of people that may not be elite athletes listening to this podcast, but want to be mobile. And I've actually seen it in my own father as he's gotten older. Losing his mobility has been a really, really tough thing for him to go through. Someone who used to play tennis 3 times a week and now, can't really move. And so it's so important, and something people don't talk about very much. And look, me personally, I remember in 9th grade, I saw people starting to go to the gym after school. I started going, and I bought this Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia to Weightlifting, and this huge book. And that's where I kind of just followed that. I said, oh, he trains chest and back on Mondays and shoulders and legs and arms and whatever. And I just kind of followed his same splits and did the same things. But I realized recently, I've been missing out on a lot by just doing those old traditional bodybuilding movements. So love to hear your philosophy about it.
Well, we tell people that all the time in terms of I can't believe honestly that people still do the body part training, the old Arnold stuff. I'm always amazed how little progress we've actually made in the mainstream. And that's why I'm trying to do more of these mainstream podcasts, because one of the things that we talk about really is we would love for people to do 2 total body workouts a week encompassing about an hour each. If you could do that, it's life-changing. But to go to the gym and to train body parts and to sit on machines and to walk on treadmills, I mean, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was look at what everybody else is doing and do exactly the opposite, and you'll probably be moving really positively in the right direction. And I think that, at least in the fitness world, it's really true. If you walk into sort of the average big box gym and just kind of looked around and said, gee, well, what's going on in here? A lot of treadmill walking, a lot of machine usage. And you started thinking, well, what do I want to do? My advice would be do the opposite of everything that you see in there, in terms of body part training to me is just dumb. And I'm probably too blunt, but I look at it and think it's a huge waste of time, because the average person doesn't have, we find, at least in a big part of our business now is adult fitness. Probably 2/3 of our business is adult fitness. And most of that is 2 days a week, because that's what people either can afford or have time for. And what we end up with is people are taking advice from hobbyists who like to work out. And the hobbyist who likes to work out is giving advice to, say, a middle-aged person who really doesn't like to work out and is trying to look and think, how do I get the best bang for my buck? And that person ends up doing back day at Gold's Gym or whatever it is, and realizing, wow, that's like very little bang for your buck. Whereas we're looking at it, and that's where the whole kind of functional training thing, which is, that's another conversation in itself. But we're trying to get people to warm up. We're trying to get people to stretch. We're trying to get people to do power work, to throw medicine balls. We're trying to get in, as I said, total body strength training. We always tell people we would like you to do a pushing exercise, a pulling exercise, some sort of squatting exercise, some sort of what we would call, I guess, a hip dominant or posterior chain exercise, and some core exercises. And then we want you to do some conditioning work, but not the standard sort of low intensity slog that you see a lot of people do. But we want you to really get your heart rate up in certain situations. We want you to do interval training, which has been proven to be far superior from a fitness standpoint. So there's just so much that we're trying to get out into that mainstream person.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what's the difference, would you say, between a functional trainer and your traditional trainer at the big box gym?
Well, I'll go back a step, and I always say I got stuck with the term functional training. I did not have any intention of being associated with the word functional, but in 2003-ish, Human Kinetics contacted me and they said, we would like you to write a book called Functional Training for Sports. To which my response was, I don't know what functional training is. I'm the wrong guy for the book. You should probably talk to somebody else. They came back to me and said, we think you're absolutely the right guy. We think what you're doing is functional training. And my response was, so I'm just going to write a book about how we train, and you're going to call it Functional Training for Sports. And they said, effectively, yes, that's what we're going to do. I had no idea that this is something that would sort of follow me around for the rest of my life, and would, in some ways, if you look at in the more mainstream sports performance world, there are people who don't like me because of my association with the word functional. But when I wrote the book, one of the things I had to do was, they said, okay, you have to write some definitions. And I said, functional training is training that makes sense. And then I went on to explain that life is basically a game that's played on your feet. And that, so if we're thinking about what functional training probably is, it's probably not where you're sitting down on a machine doing things that you would never do in real life, right? So that was
Right.
the biggest thing that we started to look at, was this idea of, okay, functional training is training that makes sense. So if I'm thinking that I'm going to be picking stuff up or picking things up over my head, or I'm going to be stepping up on things, or I'm going to be walking one leg at a time, all of this stuff, well, things that are functional, quote unquote, should probably look more like those activities that you would see in your daily life, as opposed to these odd. I always, the one thing we know, and sorry I'm rambling, but I always use, I think it was Potter Stewart was a Supreme Court justice. They asked him to define pornography when they had this pornography in the Supreme Court decision, and he said, it's tough to define, but I know it when I see it. And
Mm.
I feel that way about functional training. It's tough to define, but I know it when I see it. And the other thing that I know is I know what I would consider non-functional training or dysfunctional training. I know that when I see it. So if I go in a gym and I see somebody say, hey, he's sitting in a chair looking like he's kicking two footballs simultaneously, when would that ever happen? Oh, pretty much never, right? I mean, when would you ever do a leg extension? I have the same standard jokes. I said, unless you are a one-legged man in an ass kicking contest, you're never going to do a leg extension, right? When you look at the leg curl and you say, okay, there's a guy in there, he's laying on his stomach and he's trying to kick himself in the ass. When do you think you'd ever do that? And you're like, pretty much never. And you look over and think, how about the guy that's laying on his back, pushing the weight away from himself? And I'm like, well, that would be a guy who really sucked at football. That's possible that you could end up on your back and have to push somebody off with your feet. Other than that, I can't think of any time. Maybe playing with your kids, when you used to play like those airplane games with your kids. But, you know what I mean? We started really trying to examine all these exercises and say, which of these things make sense if we just applied a really simple filter to them? And you realize that, well, most machine training doesn't make sense.
Mm. Wow.
Isolated, curl machines, tricep machines. Okay, when are you going to do that? When are you going to sit down and try to hit yourself in the forehead with something? Or these things just aren't going to happen. And that became, you started thinking about unilateral. When are you going to squat on two legs? When you go to the bathroom, right? That's probably the only time. And you're never going to do that with weight on your back. So you start looking and thinking, nobody ever really squats down and stands up with weight on their back. It just doesn't happen in the
Right.
real world, right? It's so we ended up, and it became this idea of functional training. Then we sort of expanded it another level, and I said it's the application of functional anatomy to training. So we started to look at this idea of functional anatomy and saying, what is that? If the leg extension isn't a functional exercise, then what is a functional exercise? So you start thinking about a one-leg squat or a split squat or a step up, and you say those things seem a little bit more real world in terms of the muscles working in relationship to the ground the way that they would in real life, and they're working one leg at a time unilaterally the way that they would work in real life. So there's all of these kind of things that you look at and say that ends up being this thing that we call functional training. But what it is to me, it just goes back to that initial idea. It's just training that makes sense. I would look at it and say, okay, what's the best way to do this? And I would be like, the more things we can do standing up, the better. Right? That just makes sense. The more things we can do without machines, the better. That just makes sense. So that's how the thought process began.
I love it. Love it. Yeah. And I will say, I have a trainer now that forces me to try to get out of this mindset. And yesterday I did a whole bunch of one-legged stuff, and I'm literally just as sore or more sore than I would be. And and then a month ago I hurt my back because I'm squatting with heavy weights on it. And it's like, I'm like thinking to myself, I can get just as good as a workout with no weight on my back just by doing one-legged stuff. And it's more functional. I'm increasing my balance. I'm working muscles I never really hit before, and it's way more functional.
Right, exactly. And that's what happens when you think about that stuff. We've been conditioned to believe certain things based on sports like powerlifting or sports like Olympic weightlifting or things like that. And I said, from my standpoint growing up, we saw bodybuilding on TV. So like you said, Arnold's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, right? Okay, this makes sense because look at these guys they look unbelievable. And then you realize that's all drugs, so that didn't make any sense. And then we used to have powerlifting on Wide World of Sports, so you'd see these really strong people. Or you'd have Olympic lifting on Wide World of Sports when I was a kid, and you'd see these really strong people, and that was what you associated weight training with. But then
Mhm.
what we started to look at was the process of sports improvement, or a lot of it was rehab too, looking at, okay, what are people doing? What are people doing when someone gets hurt? That's what I started looking at in the 90s.
Mm.
And then looking at that and thinking, if this is the best way to get somebody healthy, then it's probably also the best way to keep somebody healthy. And
Mm.
that's where we started to look at core training differently and look at unilateral training differently. Again, when I started, and because whatever, 25 years ago, I was like everybody else. But then I started to think about things like, do sit-ups make sense? No, sit-ups don't make sense, right? I mean, your abdominal,
Interesting.
think about it. This again, you go back to the function idea. At no time is the function of your abdominal muscles to bring your chest towards your legs. There's
Right.
nothing besides a sit-up in the real world where that ever happens. But when
True.
you stand up and when you walk, well, that muscle's biggest job is to be an anti-extension muscle. It's kind of keep your posture right. You don't want a big sway back. You don't want your butt sticking out. You don't want your gut sticking out. That's what that muscle's job is. That muscle's job is to keep this sort of upright cone or pillar pulled together. That's why all of a sudden you
Mm.
start to see planks become popular and side planks become popular because people started to realize, hey, let's train these muscles in the way that they're actually working in real life. And then as we began to understand more and more about how those muscles worked in real life, we started to change what we did.
Mm.
And then you end up, again, you keep coming back to this idea of functional training, but in some ways I could look at it and think you could call it intelligent training and I wouldn't argue with you.
Right, right. I wonder how much of it, right? I think when I first was starting out was like, I want to get bigger. I want to look good. I want to, when you're younger, obviously you have the athletes, right, who you trained a lot of those and those are just trying to improve in their one particular sport. So they're probably maybe not as concerned as your typical gym bro or gym girl who, just wants to look really good and so the bodybuilding, I mean, look, the bodybuilding does work from a perspective of how you look, you can get results. Does the functional still kind of get the same results in terms of the kind of like hypertrophy or whatever?
I think it works better actually, but that's again my
Right.
opinion. One of the things I always say to people is go to a go to a high level track meet and look at the people at the track meet and say, I think I'd probably like to look like these people. Probably much more so than if you went to a bodybuilding show, you would go to a bodybuilding show and think, wow, it's actually really kind of a freak show in terms of
Right.
most of these people are ingesting huge amounts of drugs, and most of them don't have the type of physique that you would actually want. But
Right.
if you went to a track meet and looked particularly you'd look at the sprinters and the jumpers and say, wow, the sprinters and the jumpers look the way that I want to look. And then you start saying to yourself, if form follows function, right, then
Hmm.
probably training like a sprinter or a jumper is probably really what you want. So what you realize is that there's so much of what we've been told by Muscle Magazine people, by influencers, by people that have something to sell that just really isn't true. Even though as a kid, I thought I could look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I thought I could look like Franco Columbo or Frank Zane or one of these guys because I didn't know about steroids when I was in college.
Right.
I had no
Hmm.
idea. And then you realize that it's as much a chemistry contest as it is a training contest. And and I was wondering why, gee, I'm training really pretty hard and doing all the right things. And I don't look like these guys. And I really couldn't understand why. Probably about my junior year of college, people started explaining to me why. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. Okay. There's a little more in play here than we thought. So I think that's the other thing when you think about the gym bros. One, a lot of these gym bros are using drugs. A lot, if you look at your average Instagram influencer,
Hmm.
and again, I would
Hmm.
say at the average, if we went down the middle, I'd say the average person is using drugs. I'd say there's
Yeah.
probably some on either end of the spectrum, some that are really heavy drug users, some that are not using any. But I would say on the average, there's probably a lot of drug use that's going on in there. And I think you see that in Hollywood with actors. I think you see it all over the place. Whenever you see one of these transformations where you look and think, wow, how did that happen? I can probably tell you how it happened.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. I've seen that as well,
yeah,
for sure.
and that's a lot of what the average person isn't seeing, isn't understanding. And then, like you said, you get into people when you start thinking about um, the mobility piece and the health piece. What we preach all the time is safe and smart. That's what we want training to be. I want training to be safe. I want training to be smart. I don't, like you said, hurting your back doing back squats. That's not going to happen in our place. We're just not doing that
Mm.
because it is neither safe nor smart. Because as you said, I can show you 10 one-legged exercises that will get you the exact same result and more, as you said, because we're talking about balance and stabilize the muscles. There's all these other things that you're going to get that you would not get from simply putting as much weight as you can on your back and doing as many squats with it as you can. It's
Right.
we live in this kind of oversimplified influencer dominated world, and unfortunately people like me, I'm an influencer, but I'm an influencer on a really probably small intelligent segment of the population, be that coaches or trainees.
Hmm.
But I'm
Yeah.
not going to compete with the shirtless Instagram guy, because
Right.
definitely
I
not me.
did hear you say on a previous podcast, though, you never really looked like a bodybuilder, but when you were a little younger, at least you were doing a lot of, you could do really heavy lifts, and so when you'd go into these sports teams and be like, oh wow, that guy just looks like a regular guy, and he can lift more than I can lift.
Yep. And that's and again that in the beginning, because in the beginning I was doing everything I'm saying not to do, I was doing heavy
Right.
back squats, heavy deadlifts, that stuff. And the good thing was a lot of there's a nice residual to a lot of those things, so that I could always do things, and that people would look at and be kind of like, oh God, he's amazingly average, and yet he can do these things. That I would tease my professional athletes all the time and think, hey, all you got to do is be better than me. I'm a you know I'm a 40-year-old dad, and you're not better than me right now. So let's go.
Well, I bet you there's a lot of people, including myself, listening right now who are like, okay, well, I learned this way of training. I'm used to this way of training, going to the gym, doing arms one day and chest and legs another day and chest another day. How do I make the transition? Maybe tell us a little bit about, you have a bunch of training centers yourself, right? And you do other
We have
trainings?
two actual training facilities, yes. So we have one really big one in a little bit north of Boston that's about 22,000 square feet. And then we have another one that's about 8,000 square feet, which is kind of a little bit northeast of where we are. But I think the way that you make that transition is you start to look at, I think the biggest thing is looking at what's the goal, right? I mean, the goal for
Mhm.
most of us, again, I think the look good thing is a in your 20s thing.
Yeah.
And then I think suddenly you get into your 30s, and what ends up happening is you just drop off the map. You're not working out at all anymore. Now maybe you've got a wife, and maybe you've got kids, and maybe you've got a job, and maybe you've got a commute, and suddenly you realize that's why that's where the dad bod term comes in, right? Because suddenly you go from being this 20 something who's out in the bars looking for a mate of some sort or another, and then all of a sudden that happens, and then you think, okay, it doesn't really matter how I look anymore, and you suddenly think, but it does matter that I have a job, and it does matter that I'm making money, and it does matter that I buy a house. And that's why, like I said, for us, uh, we really push this 2 or 3 full body days, like, because I think that's a very realistic routine that anybody can keep up with. If someone said to me, well, my my constraint is time, my constraint is money, I'd be like, yeah. I mean, if we're talking about an hour, 2 days a week, and it's going to run you $200 a month, if you really wanted to be in shape, you'd be able to come up with both the money and the time to do that. And
Right.
I think what happens is we've got all these hobbyists, people who like to work out. It is their hobby. It's what they do sort of recreationally who are giving advice, and suddenly you're thinking, that's why I hate the body part thing, because let's just say for you, you've got a family and you've got work, commute, and you've got all these things to do, and you think, I only get to the gym twice a week on average. And if you're doing body part stuff, that means you might be doing each body part once every 2 weeks.
Right.
Because you're just not getting to the gym. You're like, oh, I got it. And then usually what happens with guys, you always get there on chest day, right? So you end up realizing that all I ever do is chest and arms because I only go 2 days a week. And I want to, again, we're always so dumb. We want to do the stuff we can see in the mirror. And so that's where in our mind the reward is. And I always tell everybody the reward's actually behind you, because most people are looking at you when you're walking away, not when they're coming towards you. So you're doing all the wrong stuff, because the guy who does chest and arms usually ends up with this sort of distorted looking physique. Sometimes you look at a guy and think, well, he's kind of like big and he sort of looks like he lifts weights. So he doesn't look very athletic because he's got a really big chest and really big biceps. And he's a little bit kind of pulled forward because he's not doing the back stuff. And then you look at the track guy or, the guy that's running or jumping, and you think, well, that guy looks perfect, right? He's got a butt, he's got a back, he looks taller, he looks more athletic. So we're looking at all of that stuff and thinking, get away from that, get to the gym and think, okay, I'm going to do, if you want to say a chest exercise, great, a push, right? I'm going to do a push. And I don't know, some people go, no, I got to do 8 of them. I got to do bench, and then I got to do flies, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do that. I'm like, no, you don't. Just go and do one exercise and do it hard, and you'll be fine. And then pick a pulling exercise and do that one exercise and do it hard. And then find some sort of squatting knee dominant exercise and do that one exercise and do it hard. And then find that hip dominant exercise, do that hard, right? Then turn around, get a couple core exercises, do those. And then for us, we talk about the first 15 minutes being the most important, because again, and I'm talking guys mostly, but anybody that goes to the gym, most people just go to the gym and start lifting weights. People do no preparation. You alluded to mobility in the beginning with your dad. So when you get in there and you think, with us, like if someone trains with us, they come in and they're doing foam rolling. So they're working on the quality of their tissues. And then they're going to static stretch. Then they're going to get up and they're going to do some sort of dynamic warm up. Then they're going to do some sort of power work. Our clients it's probably 20 minutes before you get into the weight room. So you won't.
And you're a fan of foam rolling. You think that's
I
important.
love foam rolling. I'm a huge, because, and again, there's a lot of the anti-foam rolling people out there that I don't really understand, because the way I've analyzed foam rolling is nothing more than self-massage.
Right.
And you think, who doesn't like a good massage, right? But suddenly when we start talking about self-massage, people say, oh, it doesn't work, it's not good for you, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, do it. All you say to people, foam roll for 2 weeks and then come back and talk to me. Invariably, the person will say, I have to buy one of those foam rollers. Always. And that's why whenever people say it doesn't work, I think, how did it become this multi-million-dollar industry of selling foam rollers if it didn't work? Why are so many people buying them? Why are so many people carrying them around, bringing them to the gym? Everybody feels better who does it. But there's this small minority, and it's usually sort of the hardcore weightlifter type. Oh, it doesn't work. And then you say, have you ever done it? No, I don't do it. It doesn't work. I'm kind of like, That's like telling me you don't like a food you haven't tasted. It's kind of like, it's not realistic for you to tell me it doesn't work. So, and it's the same way with stretching. Everybody needs to stretch. We know that we're losing flexibility. It's part of aging, right? It's part of aging that our head is coming forward and that our chest is coming forward and that we're more slumped and we're getting shorter. And you think, if I just stretched, I could combat a lot of those things. If I just foam rolled, if I just worked on my thoracic extension, I could get rid of my forward head. There's all of these things. I always tell everybody, if you just, again, look at the aging population and see what they look like. And in general, you'll say, I don't really love the way they look. When you get old, you get stooped, right? Your head gets pushed forward. Your shoulders get rolled forward. You walk with a shorter stride. There are all these things that happen to you that don't necessarily have to happen. I always say, if you came to our gym and looked at people, nobody looks their age. Nobody. I could take you around the whole gym and be like, she's 74, she's 75, she's 68. And you would be like, really? I'm like, yeah. And I am
Right.
100% convinced it's because they train right.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you
And I've seen
train
people
right,
reverse that. I've seen people reverse that
oh,
forward hunch too when they start training the right
absolutely.
way.
Yep. We
Yeah.
see it all the time. People end up, I have people say that all the time. Oh, my friend said I got taller. And I said, well, you did. And you didn't really get taller as much as we just put your spine back where it was supposed to be, which puts you back to the height that you were at some point a couple of years ago that you were no longer because of the changes that have taken place. But you've got to be working on your thoracic spine and working on your extension. There's all these things. You've got to be working on your hip mobility. That's, you've got to be stretching. You've got to be getting into internal rotation and external rotation. And you've got to be stretching your adductors. There's all these things. There's just so much stuff that people aren't doing. And what we do well is we always say recipe, not menu. So you get the program and here's the recipe. Boom, 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 boom. You don't get to substitute. It's not like the menu. On the other side of the menu, you get to pick, right? You can look and say, I think I'll have this today. That's the body part thing, right? I think I'll have steak. Or maybe I'll have chicken. And then I don't think I like that potato, but maybe I'll have some rice. You know what I mean? On ours, it's like, here it is. Here's the recipe. We're going to make something really good. The only way you make something really good is you put everything in the right order, at the right time, in the right amounts. And that's
Nice.
the difference in what we're doing from a training perspective versus what the average person is doing. The average person has, if you think of their recipe, they've usually got all the wrong ingredients and all the wrong amounts. And they're leaving things out. So if you start looking at it and thinking to yourself, have I left things out? And like I said, in the case of the body part thing, maybe you left out, maybe it's been weeks since you've done legs because you only end up going twice a week and you really like to do your upper body stuff. Like stuff doesn't, not as high a priority. So for us, every day you come, everything gets done.
Yeah.
Well, I
And I
don't know
wonder
if
about that. Let me ask you real quick about that. Is
Mhm.
there something there where because you're not just hammering one body part with 12 sets that, you're not maybe as sore? You've got a full body workout, but maybe you're not as sore and therefore you can kind of do the same full body thing again 2 or 3 days later and not be sore for 2, 3 days like you are when you really hit a single body part. Do you find that that's helpful?
Oh, absolutely. Because I look
Yeah.
at it, I don't ever want, well, no, I shouldn't say I don't ever want you to be sore, but I never want you to be really sore. I
Yeah.
always think if you're really sore, we made a mistake.
Yeah.
We,
Yeah.
we
Like
did something.
I heard a bodybuilder say his legs have basically been sore. He either trained his legs or his legs were completely shot and sore for the last 20 years of his life or something like that,
Right. And again, if you are in fact a bodybuilder, if that is how you identify, and again, I look at it and think if you identify as a bodybuilder, then you should be competing in bodybuilding competitions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're just an exerciser who chooses to use bodybuilding methods. And I would look at that and think, why would somebody want to destroy their legs that they're so sore that they can't get around the next day? That doesn't make any sense to me. Particularly, and again, because we talk about, and I could, as I told you, I'm easy to wind up and hard to shut off. But
No,
when
this is
we look,
great.
we always talk about adult clients. The thing that makes you an adult is a job,
Mm.
right? And
Yeah.
I always say a job that would be impacted by your being injured.
Right.
That's so when people always say to me, well, how do you define adult client? I said, we have athlete clients, we have adult clients. My athlete clients are people, they play the sport for a living, or they're playing it in college, or they're playing it in high school, whatever it is. Their primary emphasis is their sport. When you're done with that, when you're no longer playing professional sports, when you're no longer whatever on the national team, when you say that's what I always say pickleball players aren't athletes. They're adults who want to keep themselves busy. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to look at that and think, I'm going to train you like an adult who, if you're hurt and can't go to work, that's a problem. Because again,
Mm-hmm.
unless you're this independently wealthy adult who works for themselves, being injured and not being able to go to work, imagine going to work and saying, I can't really leave my desk today because I trained legs so hard that I need to just sit in this chair. And if you're going to ask me to do anything besides sit in this chair, it's going to be problematic.
Right.
And
Yeah.
but that's the difference between listening to advice from sort of an exercise enthusiast and listening to advice from an experienced coach. I look at it and think, I want you to know that, or I want me to know that you have to go back to work tomorrow and that you
Mm-hmm.
should be able to function at whatever your job is. You should be able
Mm-hmm.
to function at that job. And I also tell people, my goal is that when you get up in the morning, you tell me you felt better than the day before. Not worse.
Mm.
I don't ever want anybody to get up and think, "Oh my God, I got up and I was crippled. I could barely move." I think, okay, we screwed up.
Mm.
We're more. I always think our goal is to kind of coax adaptation as
Mm.
opposed to force it. We're not gonna
Nice.
we're not gonna beat it out of you.
Yeah.
We're just gonna gradually pull it out of you. But over time, as again, if you watched our adult clients and you looked at them over a long period of time, over a year or 2 years, you would see people that again became much more functional in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that they were much more able to live their life the way they wanted to. So we'll get people all the time who'll say things like, "Oh my God, I went and skied this winter and I felt amazing. I've never felt great at the start of ski season." And that was the kind of feedback that we got in the beginning when we very first started doing this, or people saying, "Oh, I went and we hiked a really long distance and I felt great." So
Mm-hmm.
I think what training should really do is prepare you for the things that you really want to do in life. It shouldn't be your life.
Right.
But again, we're our advisors a lot of times, the people that we're taking direction from, it is their life.
That's right. That's
And
right.
it's their source of recreation. It's their reason for getting up in the morning. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not most of the world. Okay, think about this. When I went over the stats today in our staff meeting, 24% of the people in America have a gym membership. So only a quarter belong to a gym. Of that quarter, 18% use it at least one day a week. When you take 18% of 24, you're down to 5% of people who are
Wow.
actually going to the gym once a week, one day a week, right? Then I look at that 5% and I say, what percent of that 5% is actually training correctly, right? I might go to
Yeah.
I might go to 1% to there. So now
Right.
now we're into like 0.05% of the population probably trains in a way that is good for them. It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
small numbers.
Would love to dive a little more deep into some of these more effective ways. I know you like, I've heard you talk about the posterior chain as being really important as well, right? So, kind of like going back to the whole thing of thinking about a sprinter, right? Like just the glutes, the hamstrings, the kind of the core area there. Do you consider that to be like the most important part? And maybe that's why as well, when you're splitting it up and you're only training legs once a week, that could be maybe less effective than doing two full body workouts where you're hitting legs and that chain twice.
Right, exactly. Or in even a better world, 3 times. Because
Yeah.
when you look at that, because that's the other thing, when most people say legs, what they're really thinking about is quads. Most of the time,
Mm,
most people, to them, legs means some sort of squatting variation or leg press variation, and they may throw in the token hamstring curl every now and then. But
mm-hmm.
in the general world, that posterior chain is really drastically undertrained. There's been a big increase in sort of glute training, but it's almost exclusively on the female side. You
Right.
start seeing like hip thrust and the hip thrust machine and things like that, but it's more aesthetically based.
Right.
But again, if you look at males, probably very little of that going on. And in reality, again, think about this. You're at 5% of the people that if that 5%, if they did total body, is getting one workout a week. 5% of the people are getting one total body workout a week at best.
Mm,
And as I said, I think, the number of people, if you said how many are getting two really good, sound, well designed workouts a week, 1% of the population. So
yeah.
the good thing is, whether it's this podcast, whether it's our business, whatever it is, I think our potential for impact is massive, because all
Mm-hmm.
I got to do is get somebody to think, wow, I just have to go to the gym twice a week for an hour and do a total body workout. That doesn't seem so bad, right?
Right.
As
Right.
opposed to thinking about 5 days of bodybuilding and a chest day and a back day and an arm day and a leg day, and you kind of look and think, my God, I don't have all day, I don't have all week to take care of this training schedule that this person laid out for me. Whereas
Yeah.
ours is deliberately simple.
And do you see any issue with, let's say myself, because I actually work from home, and I'm one of these guys that actually enjoys going to the gym and listening to my audiobooks and podcasts and just getting away from being in front of a screen all day. So kind of going there. If I was to do kind of a full body thing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, let's say, is it okay like to do, if I'm doing legs on Monday, can I do legs again on Wednesday? Would I change up the exercises typically, or
We would
am I
typically
not going to
Yep.
failure?
Yep. We would go to failure. I would
Okay.
advocate going to failure on one set.
Mm,
And that's it. Just one, which means figure out what you need from a warm-up perspective, and then figure out what weight is that real work set, and then take that work set to the point where you can't do another rep, or to the point where the ninth and 10th rep are really difficult to complete. In
mm-hmm,
general, for us, we never do the same exercise twice in a week, but
mm,
we will do the same pattern twice in a week. We'll do the same pattern every day. So we might say, okay, what are we doing today? What is in our upper push category today? And that might be dumbbell bench press one day. It might be dumbbell incline bench press another day. It might be some sort of standing cable press on the third day. But there's going to be 3 different pushing exercises. And in every one of those pushing exercises, there would hopefully be a limit set where you're pushing yourself on one of those sets. And
mm,
there's no need, because that's what we always think about, the multiple set thing, right? The analogy I always love is, they say you can't beat a dead horse, right? It doesn't get any more dead if you hit it more times.
mm-hmm,
Muscles are pretty much the same way, in terms of there's not a real benefit to kind of beating up the muscle to the point where you're so sore. And people say, "Oh, that's how you get big." It's really not. For the average person. And this is I wander, but there are people that are responders to weights, and they generally are the people that like to lift weights. So
mm,
you'll see some people, and you think like body types, right? The body types, ectomorphs are skinny people, mesomorphs
yep,
are muscular people, endomorphs are people that tend to be a little round, a little more roly poly, right? But the mesomorph is the one who responds to weights, and they
mm,
pretty much respond no matter what they do. But they equate that response with knowledge as opposed to genetics. Whereas if you look at the ectomorphic person could do the identical workout, but not get the identical result, because they have a
mm,
different body type. And endomorphic person, the same way, could do the exact same workout, different results, different body type. So what ends up happening, again, the influencers tend to be the mesomorphs. And it's very much like, oh, look, it worked for me. And it's like, yeah, it worked for you. You're a responder. You're exactly that. You're the guy who it would work for. But
mm-hmm.
do you know how to train the ectomorphic person? Do you know how to train the endomorphic person? And again, that's why we try to shoot for this. We're going to shoot for the middle of the target, and we're not going
Yeah,
to worry about outliers.
yep, yep.
Outliers are not probably it's probably not where the business is, truthfully, if you're just looking
Mm,
at it as a business person.
mm-hmm. So yeah, let's run through like what would a kind of a sample workout look like at one of your gyms?
So, like I said, you'd come in. When you get in there, you'd grab a foam roller, you start foam rolling, your coach comes over, everybody rolls, whatever,
Mm,
that's usually 5 minutes. When everybody's done rolling, the coach is going to take you through a series of stretches. For us, generally speaking, there will be some sort of a hip flexor stretch. There'll be some sort of hamstring stretch. There'll be some sort of adductor stretch. There'll be some sort of hip rotator stretch. You will always go through those 4 primarily lower body stretches. When you're done with those stretches, you'll get up, you'll go over, and you'll go through some dynamic warm up, which The closest thing would be kind of if you watched a track and field person warm up, where you might go over and do some, some walking knee to chest and some walking heel to butt and some leg kicks and some shuffles and some karaoke's and high knees. You're going to go through that type of dynamic warm up. Then you're going to go over, we've got a huge masonry wall that's 100 feet long, probably at least. You're going to go over there and you're going to do a couple of medicine ball throws. You're going to intersperse those with some sort of jump or maybe an agility ladder drill. So we're thinking about that power segment. You'll do 2 to 3 sets of that, alternating a jump and a throw. From there, then you're going to go into the weight room. The way that we set it up is it's sort of, we call it pods, which is kind of left over from when we had from the COVID. That was one of the good things that came out of COVID. But we kind of work. Pod 1 will generally be some sort of power-oriented exercise. Let's say like a kettlebell swing. Kettlebell swing is generally a very safe exercise that you can do with a pretty broad population range. We might pair that up with some sort of core exercise. And then in our situation, maybe some sort of small rotator cuff thing, something little that we can do as a filler. Like we'll use fillers to get a little bit more time in between exercises. You'll do 3 sets there. You move into the second pod. Second pod is kind of our major strength pod, where now you're going to do a pushing exercise and a knee dominant exercise. So for instance, you might do split squats and dumbbell bench press, alternate, do a set of split squat, do a set of dumbbell bench press, go through 3 of those. You then move into the third pod, which is where kind of our Kaiser machines are. And there we've got pulleys, so we can do some sort of pulling exercise. So we're going to do some sort of upper pull variation. It could be a row, it could be a pull down. And we're going to usually pair that up with some sort of posterior chain exercise, which could be some sort of hip lift, hip thrust variation. I don't like the term hip thrust, but that's a longer conversation for another day. And then when you're done with that, we're gonna really push our clients to condition. It is very difficult to get our older, sort of our middle-aged client base to do some conditioning. We probably have, I'm going to say we've got more than 20 of the assault bikes. And
Wow.
we're going to really push interval training on the assault bike on everybody that we possibly can. We'll start out with some very, very simple stuff. We usually start out with 10 seconds on, 20 seconds off. And we tell somebody the 10 seconds on doesn't have to be, it's not kind of all out, balls to the wall sort of thing. It's, hey, push it up in the 60 RPM range for 10 seconds, chill out for 20. And there's those assault bikes have a 10-20 protocol built in. So there's a protocol where you just press a button. It gives you 10 seconds work, 20 seconds rest, 8 repetitions. We usually start with that as a nice introduction to interval training for people. And then we kind of have this progressive interval training program that we're going to follow that will get progressively more difficult as you go along. And on those days, we would like somebody to really to get their heart rate kind of out of their comfort zone. So we want to get people away from the idea that walking is enough, because it's not. Low intensity cardiovascular work is great. I don't want to knock it, but it's also not the only thing that you need. You need to make your heart go faster at some point during the course of that week, provided again that you're healthy. And it's crazy. You'd walk in hours like today. We did 4 mile-and-a-half intervals on the bike. So it takes a little under 4 minutes. And it's 4 minutes at race pace. So you're going as hard as you can go, given that it's going to last 4 minutes. Right. But like in that situation, someone like me, I'm 66. My heart rate was 173 beats a minute in the last interval today, which is theoretically way, again, and that's the other thing you find is that the 220 minus your age thing is not very accurate. And you need to get, most of our older clients will get in the 160s and 170s with no problem, very comfortably, and be able to do that once or twice a week. And that's going to be, I think that's the kind of stuff that, again, it keeps your heart healthy. It keeps your arteries healthy. There's a lot that's going into the fact, you don't want to jump into that with no prep work, but you do want to try to make that pump work in different ways. and
Yeah.
make your circulatory system work in different ways, because just being efficient at supplying blood in these kind of low intensity environments isn't really enough,
Mm.
because you're
So
gonna
are you resting much throughout this 1 hour session? Is
no,
there
very little actual rest. There's very little, like very little downtime. If you watch, it would kind of look like perpetual motion, but it's not, in the sense it's not like a circuit. We're deliberately sort of pairing upper and lower body exercises, and then we're sprinkling core exercises in there, so that what would be rest might be a plank.
right,
So you're
right.
you're resting in terms of, your heart rate is coming down. You're no longer using the muscles that you were using in that given workout, but you're doing something else. So
Yeah,
the rests probably would never be longer than you'd never go longer than a minute without doing something else. So
interesting.
yeah, but again, think about, like you said, the old Arnold. We used to go and we'd do a set of squats, and then we'd sit down for 5 minutes and shoot the shit, and then go
Yeah,
back and do another set of squats. And it might take us most of the day to get squats done because of the way
yeah,
we
I
did
know.
it. And you looked at that and
It's
thought,
crazy.
how unproductive is this? Unless, like
Yeah,
in my case at that time, the goal was I wanted to squat as much as I could, and I achieved that goal. But if your real goal is this sort of more general fitness, that, like you said, maintaining, because what we really want to do, if you just maintain your mobility and your condition and your strength, if you could look at it, and I think, like, now I'm in amazing condition for 66,
mm.
except I'm not much better than I was when I was 36. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
that's great.
because I haven't gotten worse, perceptually, I've gotten significantly better. But the
Yes,
reality is, I haven't gotten better. I've just gotten better based on my deconditioned peers who weren't doing anything. So if I see friends, and you start seeing friends who can't get up and down stairs and are using handrails, and you think, wow, these people are 66 and they're infirmed.
right.
I'm 66, and at least in a relative sense, I'm pretty healthy. I can pick up what I need to pick up. I can run up a flight of stairs. Like, whatever I want to do, I can pretty much do. I
Yeah,
can't run anymore. My knees are not good. I'm suffering the wear and tear of old age. I always say that's the other part. Whether you like it or not, you're going to get old. Everybody
yeah,
does, but you get to choose the rate, and you get to choose the level of infirmity that you're going to go into your old age with, and
yeah.
that's the
I
part
wanted to ask you,
about.
you mentioned running. What is your opinion for kind of just the average person on long distance running? It had a big craze. A lot of people still think, oh, I need to run 5 miles a day. Assuming someone's not training for a marathon or a professional long distance runner, is there a need to do long distance kind of slow cardio?
I'm going to take the bait on this one. I'm a totally anti-running person. Our athletes run
Mm,
because our athletes have to run. I don't encourage anybody after that to run. Yeah, I always think, if you're a
mhm.
runner, run. You're never going to stop a runner from running. If you're not a runner and you said, "Hey, I want to get fit," I'd be like, buy one of those air bikes. Whether buy an Airdyne, buy an Assault, buy whatever, but buy one of those air bikes, because you can beat yourself to a pulp with no, what I refer to as orthopedic cost. There's going to be
Yep.
no downside to this, and a lot of upside. In running, statistically, I've been a big anti-running person for adults for years, because statistically 50% of people who take up running get hurt. That is the statistical, and it's almost 70% for women. So
Wow.
you start looking at it and thinking that, I always say, there's nothing else we do besides get married that has odds that are that bad. And so you look at it and think, I don't know why people do it, but some people, we win that battle, other people we lose that battle. Some people are really happy when we say, hey, you don't need to do it. So we've got people who will happily ride the assault bike and push sleds and do other things, and not worry about going out for a run. I'd rather those people walk, truly, because walking is actually at least really generally joint friendly, and is going to not result in a lot of overuse injuries, whereas running tends to not be particularly joint friendly and tends to result in a fairly significant injury rate. So, not a running fan.
Yeah. Great stuff, Coach Boyle. This has been incredible. This is real eye-opening for me. It's inspired me. I'm going to actually make some changes based on what this conversation as well. And where can people kind of follow you, find you, learn more?
Find us bodybyboyle.com, because you can click train online there. And that's what we've seen with a lot of people on this podcast is people think, how do I get a program? If you click train online, it'll lead you to our Train Heroic page and you can download it. It's called Adult Performance. And you can get on that Adult Performance program. And they're really good in terms of the guys that work with us have done. They videoed everything. It's all clickable. Train Heroic does a really nice job in making a very simple, clickable program that you can get at. I'm really active I like social media, so I play around on Instagram a lot. I'm Michael_Boyle 1959 on Instagram, and I'm mboyle1959 on Twitter. I'm pretty active on both of those platforms. So if they want to interact, that's a pretty easy place to do it. And then I have a website called strengthcoach.com, which is more of a interactive Q&A kind of site where there's a forum and you can get right on there and ask really detailed questions and get really detailed answers, whether it's from me or other people that are on the site. So you get a lot of interaction. So bodybyboyle.com, strengthcoach.com, Instagram, Twitter, they're all out there.
Amazing. Coach Boyle, you're a legend. Thank you so much for taking the time here to educate us today, and hope we can do it again sometime.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, it would really mean a lot to me if you would forward this episode along to any friends, family members, anyone that you think that would get value out of it and learn something important. The mission at Peak Performance is to help people prioritize and transform their health. And so if you think someone will get value, please, please, please do forward this episode along to them. Also, if you could please rate and review and subscribe on whatever podcast player you are listening to this on, we would greatly appreciate that as well. It means a lot. And I want to tell you about a couple of new products that we just released. You can get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com. That's BUY peakperformance.com. We just released a brand new grass-fed beef protein isolate. This is my favorite new protein powder because it's great for muscle building and recovering and all that kind of stuff, but it doesn't give the stomach discomfort and gas that a lot of people get from different types of proteins like whey protein. Some types of plant proteins can do the same as well. It seems to be really, really easy on the stomach while still giving all the great benefits of muscle building and everything else that you want from taking in adequate protein. So check out our new beef protein isolate. We have it in unflavored, which I actually mix and blend with my morning coffee every morning. We have a vanilla and we have a chocolate. You can buy it on Amazon, but again, you also do get 20% off your first order at buypeakperformance.com, BUY peakperformance.com. We've also recently released organic mushroom coffee. We have these in Keurig compatible K-cup coffee pods. We have organic mushroom coffee with lion's mane, reishi, cordyceps, turkey tail, and chaga mushrooms blended with the high altitude organic coffee that we've been using and that we've been famous for years. So that's been a big hit, that one as well. You can get on our website or Amazon, any of our products. And of course, we're always famous for our organic green superfood powder that has almost 5,000 reviews on Amazon with a very high star rating. We're known as the best tasting USDA certified organic green superfood powder with over 25 plus organic ingredients. Again, we also have the organic red superfood powder. We still, of course, have the organic plant protein for those who do prefer the plant protein, but I'm really excited about this new beef protein isolate and all of our other products. We do have over 100 products, so just check us out if you type in Peak Performance Supplements on Amazon or if you go to buypeakperformance.com. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again soon.